Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, for a lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I think we can see most of what's here. All right, so I'm going to kind of gun through a whole bunch of stuff, and there's going to be a central theme of measuring happiness through things like tweets and so on, which seems a little quixotic, but you know, we've had some success with that. But I want to tell you I'm going to give you lots of different bits and pieces, right? Things you can take on. All right, so yeah, so the basic lineup, we're going to talk about this happiness business. It will be about measuring, so what I'll call lexical meters. I think this is a thing that's developing more and more strongly. We'll connect this into literature, so Moby Dick will appear. We'll get into some fundamental things about language itself, and I think social phenomena. There's some extra stuff. I can give you these slides if you want. There's lots of things you can click and so on, and lots of other topics in there. Okay, so we have a production team. Okay, I just want to mention, yeah, so we have the Vermont Complex Systems Center. I'm the director there. It's been one of the, what do we call it, a spire actually, which is sort of a bad term, but a spire of the university for the last roughly 10 years. There are three of these spires. So people would tag whether their funding was associated with complex systems in some way. So it's done quite well, especially for a university of our size. We have lots of nice press coverage. We've built a graduate certificate in complex systems that students all across the university and undergrads will take. We have an MS in complex systems and data science. We'll have a PhD next. We've had true hires in complex systems, which has been this kind of horrible ordeal of lots of people from different departments coming together and not understanding anything and being confused with each other, and then the person choosing the department they go into. So we've done well with that. We'll see if that keeps going. We've had a number of these sort of career awards. We have a P-Case award where Josh Bongard, who's sort of a genius at all sorts of things, but especially robotics, got to stand next to Obama. Anyway, so lots of good things. This is my particular team. I run it with Chris Danforth over there. Students have gone off to do all sorts of interesting things. But we're the Computational Story Lab. We have a lot of fun. Our meeting time each week is called Story Time. I mean, we've got this whole thing going on with Story Labbers. But I do sort of think more and more that everything's about stories, and that's become more and more of my focus over time. That's Danforth jumping over a pile of things. So we like to do sports. We're in Vermont. The Spartan Beast was there, the World Championship for a while, so he didn't die. I do the ones that are kind of clean, actually. Okay, this is a summary in sort of a pictorial summary of my work, and I'm just going to throw it up here. River Networks was sort of where I started, but I came to the US. I'm from Australia. I came in '94. I read this book about complexity and thought, oh, that should be fun. I went to MIT, and they said, never mention that word again. And I ended up working with Dan Rothman, and it was great. And we did all sorts of things about continental scale networks, but that moved into networks of all sorts. There's a lot of stuff in here about networks. As you said, I worked with Duncan for 6 years at Columbia. And it's moved more and more into things that are about, as we'll talk about today, happiness, but also stories. For instance, this is shapes of stories in sports. So there's lots of different stuff, lots of things with language. All right. Courses actually are kind of interesting things for us, and I know we're not talking about teaching today, but I just this is Chris and our collection of courses. We have Twitter feeds, all sorts of madness. These all retweet each other. It's a nightmare. But the thing I wanted to point out from a research point of view is that these have been incubators. These top two of mine have been incubators for research papers. So, and over time, we're getting close to probably having about 40 papers that have somehow been attached to these courses in some way that I'm part of. There are other papers associated with other professors that have been helped along as well. But that's been a nice thing. I call it academic output. Okay, so let me get into this whole thing about we're trying to measure happiness. So what's a sort of a motivation for that? So I come from a physics background, so we like to poke fun at other fields. Of course, physicists are idiots. String theory for a start, right? Okay, so it's very embarrassing. All right, so Greenspan. This is interesting. So this, as time goes on, this is 2007. It gets more and more interesting to me that this happened. So I've been dealing with these big models. I can't figure out how to use them properly or do well with them because I can't do this part, figuring out whether people are becoming more fearful or more euphoric. So he's talking about emotion. And if he could do this, he'd get rid of his models. It's a bit of a bold statement. And he could forecast the economy. This is right. This is a bit much. It's psychohistory of sorts. Maybe he's been reading Asimov. Anyway, so it goes on with, the trouble is you can't figure out how to do that. 50 years of this business, no better than he ever was, nobody else is. It gets a little sad here. The reason is that human nature hasn't changed, which is, he's ad-libbing. I'm not sure if that's true, but we can't improve ourselves. This is worth watching. It was on the Jon Stewart show. This was Stewart's erudite response. But it's a maybe 8 or 9 minute piece. It's still worth it, especially in the context of things that happen. Some things have happened in the economy since then, some things. So this is a fun thing to look back on. Anyway, but it's about emotion. I'm not saying that if you can measure the happiness of people, you'll be able to predict the stock market, which is often the question. It's not true. But we would like to measure some things that are outside of these normal economic quantities as well. And one of them is GDP. So this is Robert Kennedy in '68. So GDP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. And it tells us everything about America except why we are proud to be. So he sort of went on about this quite a lot. So you'll see these sorts of quotes. Measurement is a big deal. I mean, sometimes, I was interested in that river network stuff was about data, right? And I always sort of felt a little bit bad about that because I was getting satellite data and just looking at the shapes of things. Of course, as a physicist, you're supposed to have your beautiful theory when you walk out the door. It's true in sociology as well. But we seem to have gotten over that a little bit. So, and these, if we go back in time, you find lovely quotes about these things. To measure is to know. This is Lord Kelvin. If you can't measure, you can't improve. So they're good. Of course, we cherry pick quotes. He also said things like this: "There's nothing new to be discovered in physics now. All that remains is more and more precise measurement." I'm sure he died in 1907. They probably didn't want to mention quantum to him. Just ignore that stuff. He also said X-rays were going to be a hoax. Anyway, all right. Right, I mean, this is what we do. You have quotes at the tops of chapters that are, these nice little cherry-pick things that the person probably didn't even say. I mentioned that I like stories. These are a bit hard to see, but I think of people as Homo narrativists now, and that we are, our work is trying to get at extracting narratives and stories from large texts. Even if it's just frames around a particular topic. Snowden appears, and there are these frames of traitor and hero. Or Lance Armstrong has these frames of, hero killed the monster 7 times plus cancer, and then the traitor one becomes, or the betrayal comes up through it. Okay, I just want to splash that up there. We're not at that, but I think a fantastically interesting thing would be the taxonomy of human stories. We'll get to it a little bit when I talk about the emotional shapes of pieces of literature, and that will connect to sort of Kurt Vonnegut's ideas of shapes of stories. All right, so let me just lay this out. So lexical meters, I'm going to say there are these 3 types. Principled lexical meters where you have scores for words or phrases and somehow you add these things up. I'm going to avoid using black box type techniques and natural language processing. We've tried those sorts of things. But my argument there is that they can work, but they don't allow you to really understand what's going on. Why is this text happier than this text? Very hard to get at. So the 2 things today will be the hedonometer. I'll also talk a little bit about this one, the lexicocalorimeter. We like to make up words. And Ben Zimmer actually favorited that when I tweeted it, so it's a real word. He's the lexicographer at the Wall Street Journal. Anyway, so it's real. Okay, you can use Twitter as a trademarking instrument. Okay, so what I'll call ground truth ones, and I'll show you these very briefly, insomniometer and the hangoverometer. You could think of anything else here, but something where you have a CDC type measure of, and this would be from sleep insufficiency, right? So it's done by surveys, and it's a static thing. It was done in 2012, in March or something. And then you correlate that with words being used at the same time and then make some sort of word-based instrument that can get a real-time measure of, perhaps, of something like sleep insufficiency, which is an enormous, enormous issue when you think about health in general. It's worse in the South, actually. Okay, so, and then what I'll call bootstrap ones. So bootstrapometers are ones where you take a word that you're interested in, like bored, and then you grow up from, you just find everything correlates with that. So these are simple, much simpler things to work with. And of course, hashtags, you can see what's surrounding them. But the ones we've worked on the most are these ones where you spend some time and some money getting scores for words in some way and then building up from it. All right, so let's get to happiness. Lots of build up, I need to talk. Okay, so people have been talking about happiness for a long time in different ways, right? So there's eudaimonia, the ancient Greeks. And of course, this was, well, we have records only from the ones who were doing pretty well for themselves, and others were getting them the grapes. They weren't growing them their own grapes. And they had different versions of what this is. You know, the sort of the loftiest would be that it's the flourishing to your true potential. It's very nice. There's also, I think, taking in as much alcohol and food was sort of an interpretation. So they argued about this. You have Bentham, who I believe is physically still present with us. He's right. They can wheel him out. Yeah. I don't English. Okay. So I'm an Australian, so I can say that. Let's see. So hedonistic calculus, right? So the action you choose should be the one that maximizes happiness for the most people in some way. Hard thing to measure, but it's where in the 1800s we get this word hedonometer, spelt slightly differently from Edgeworth, who was an economist who just sort of wrote down a couple of pages saying, wouldn't it be great if we could measure everyone's happiness, and we'd call it this. Full stop. Okay. And then we have the pursuit of happiness, right? So that was tacked on at the end. It actually wasn't in the first draft, so the first draft was more like this. There's life, liberty. Actually, it was property. I think this is right. It was life, liberty, and property, but it just didn't have that zing, and they lifted it up with the pursuit of happiness, right? So some screenwriters got in there and fixed it up. Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay, so, but you know, but it's there, and it's a big change because we have it sort of in our head. There's a frame that appeared that was not. It was just going to be property, which may have changed the way people behave. Okay. All right, so let's get away from everyone who's doing pretty well. So it's not just for the wealthy and the professors. So if you interview people, that's what they'll say. I mean, maybe you can criticize this in various ways. There seems to be evidence that people who are happy are not. That doesn't mean they're super happy, right? But happier live longer. Maybe you don't want that. But anyway, that's true. You can get at this sort of thing where this is gross national product of countries, and these are measurements of positivity or happiness. And these surveys are usually sort of 3 points. Not happy, somewhat happy, very happy. That's what you asked, right? And these are turned into 0, 1, or 2 to get some sort of quantity. So so there are this is the general observation, right? Is that there are many countries spread all over the place when income is low, and then things are doing better in general. Then you tend to be higher up. Money doesn't buy happiness. It does a little bit. But that's something that's been observed for a while back. And so there are these indices of well-being. Butan's sort of famous for saying we're never going to make any money, so let's try something else. And going to the UN and talking about well-being. Butan not necessarily doing well in general, but that's a framing they seem sort of famous for introducing. The UK, I think, at some point would call up. It's a government thing, so they would call up 20,000 people every 3 months, or rolling, and ask them, "Are you happy?" Which is a pretty weird question, does my mother? It's a strange question to be asked. And of course, it's fine. I mean, all the work we do is this sort of big data kind of thing, but it's and we're not saying that what we do supplants anything that comes before it; it just extends it, right? It adds to it. So there's an invasive element, which is a problem for interviews, and there's some very nice studies done now that will show that as you might expect, you are affecting people's responses by the questions. For instance, like asking, and I think this is in Mexico, asking people if they have certain objects in their house, such as a microwave, a car, all the way down to dirt floors versus non-dirt floors. At one end, you get people from a shame perspective saying they do have these things that you'd expect to have, running water and so on. So shame makes them lie, and at the other end, you have people saying, well, maybe they'll give me a microwave if I say I don't have one, right? So greed operates up at that end. All right, so there are a couple of easy knocks, which maybe you want to deal out for me, but I'll give you some of them. The science is kind of Orwellian. We're watching people from a distance. We're probably not doing anything that the NSA hasn't done. Anyway, and the policy that you could issue is SOMA, right? Which we've already done anyway, I guess. But that's not what we're getting at. We're trying to add something to the dashboard of society, right? So this would be one little instrument, which is something about happiness, which you've got to have GDP and you've got to have all these other things as well. Fine, and it may be everyone needs to be a little bit grumpy for everything to work well. All right, there's these sorts of things. This is Hoffa, right? The search for happiness is one of the chief sources of unhappiness. There's Colbert. Happiness is totally overrated. Happiness is for the weak. Again, very enjoyable interview. He gets on a little bit there, perfectly done. This is old Colbert, obviously. Okay, so there's your little warm-up. So let's measure it. And so our motivation was, back in 2006 or 7, let's see if we've got all this data coming in. And at that time, Twitter wasn't really a thing. Facebook was there, but of course you couldn't get at it. There were these things called blogs that people used to write. So we could get at that. And I'll show you some of the things we looked at as we go on. But we want this real-time instrument that's somehow drawing on all this text that's coming through. And even now it changes. Right now we've got Instagram, so we might want to get at photos. And we might want to, heaven forbid, measure the emotional content of emojis, I guess. So I guess we have to do that tragically. Anyway, so, but we'd like these things. So we want it to be transparent in the way it works, and I'll show you that, hopefully that it is, that we need it to be fast, lots of data. Written expression is good. We've got lots of that, so let's work on that. We need people to be in the loop somewhere, and I'll show you how that worked. Non-reactive means that we're not asking people, we're watching, NSA style. And then, as I said, we want it to be something that expands on what people have done before, right? So surveys are great, and then this is this crazy thing we put on top. It's improvable. I'll show you how it's improvable, how it's been improvable. So I'm Googling, right? We try some of the natural, this is what I'm doing. Natural language processing things. They're kind of problematic, and they're not going to scale well. So I find, well, has anyone got ratings for words? And so, yes, there was a study, ANU, which now we know is not that great in terms of its coverage. But this was a meaning space kind of study, right? So it's of course, it's undergraduates. Undergraduates at the University of Florida presented with about 1,000 words that were expert curated as being meaningful, right? So love is in there, church is in there, pancakes is in there. So it's kind of a funny list of words. Anyway, but they're presented with these words in isolation. So this is, how excited are you? Do pancakes make you excited? How powerful do you feel when the word pancake is presented to you? And it was, it's an interesting, it's done well for itself, I suppose. Lots of citations. And valence is the way to say that we're measuring happiness, but we want it to sound better. Like doctors saying idiopathic when they have no idea, right? So valence is, I'm sorry. But valence is so, and then if you see the way it was expressed, it was very much, and I have the write-up somewhere here, but very much, you really do feel happy and positive and excited, and lots of terms were used to describe these two ends. 9-point scale, kind of really a 5-point scale, or if you like, two Likert scales joined together, so neutral, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, sort of Netflix style, and then this way. All right, so here's a way to think about what we do. It's very naive, right? It's very naive. So it's going to be a temperature-like measure. So let's take, and you'll see if it doesn't work for Billie Jean, which is a complex song. Okay, so when we take words, we've got this list of 1,000 words, so we're looking through, we've got pancakes and church and so on. There are other words, suicide, there are some bad words in there. It's distributed across the spectrum, I should say, of valence. And so we find all the words for which we have a score, right? So beauty has a score on average on this 9-point scale from 1 to 9. People had ended up with 7.82. So lie is 2.79. And obviously meaning is a real problem here. And I think so lying is a good example. Of course, to English speakers, it generally means telling an untruth. And if you translate directly into Spanish, you just get simply lying down is sort of the main way that would be interpreted, if you do a naive translation. Okay, so all sorts of problems with that. We'll acknowledge that as we go on. And then you count up how many of them, and it's simply a weighted average, and we get a score, right? And so the score has to be between 1 and 9. If we do all of Thriller, and we're not weighting them for their popularity, right? So Pretty Young Thing is the same as Thriller itself. What a fine album it was. Okay, so I'm just reveling. Anyway, and Michael Jackson, everything together, 6.4. Okay, so that's, and again, waiting for popularity is a big problem for these corpora, right? So it's a huge problem for Google Books, for example. Bit of a disaster. So we're not going to use this for sentences or paragraphs or small text. We're going to use it for large text, and then we're going to try and connect it to other measures. And if we can, I'm going to have to race through this, but there's a tunability to this instrument, very much like a microscope kind of thing or a physical instrument. You can actually dial it in some way. So that's a cool thing, because we come from this physics background. All right, so this is our primitive instrument. It's very primitive, right? And this is our first effort with it. These are music lyrics. So again, Nick Kershaw's "I Won't Let the Sun Go Down on Me" is equally billed as "Beat It," right? So these things get the same. The lyrics are just in here once. It's from a long time ago, very esoteric. Okay, so that's a bit of an odd thing, but we're just going to take all the lyrics for a year and then score them using this naive thing. So you can see it's pretty messy. It's not great. And there's an overall downward trend, so that's interesting, right? So what's going on? But of course, we have the words, so we can look at what's going on. There are ways of, early on we were worried about, well, we have this set of 1,000 words, what if we had more or less? And of course, we can't do the more, so let's take less, and we took less in different ways. We still get that, randomly sampling, say, 700 words, and then measuring again and doing that again and again, you still see it. So it seems to be there. Okay, so this is actually just from song titles, in fact, and it's where we have genres. It's the that little database that started with Linux basically being used for CDs. CDs, right? So you put a CD in and it would tell you, oh my God. So it would tell you what was on your CD. Crowdsourcing. Okay. So this is just sort of a sanity test, and it's working out pretty well, right? So gospel and soul's up the top, metal and industrial's down here, and there's and there are incredibly nuanced categories. I mean, there's like various versions of Norwegian dark metal and so on. Anyway, we lump them together into their main categories. Country and Western is complicated. It's sort of in the middle. Okay. So this seems sort of okay, and there's the stability to these genres as they're going along. So we're like, okay, this is not bad. All right, so let's look at that downward trend, and this is just to start with this. This is a sort of primitive thing at the start. Before 1980s to compared to after, and we'll compare after 1980s relative to before, and we can see which words are being used more or less frequently, and we have to look at whether they are more positive or less positive than the reference text. And if you do that, we make what are called these word shift graphs. They're all ordered here in terms of their magnitude of impact, and so these are the words on this side, and these figures will change and improve, and we have interactive ones online. Which I guess I don't know if I don't have Ethernet, do I? No, right. Or this thing called Wi-Fi. That's okay. So these ones in blue on this side are words that are being used more often after the 1980s, and they after 1980, I should say, and they're more negative, right? So generally speaking, so hate and pain and death and dead, and so this is, it's not just a new music, right? Death metal is not just a new kind of music; it was a new emotional niche. That was occupied. These are, right, and so here they are summarized. There are some words that are more positive that are being used less. So that happens as well. So there's less love afterwards. And then on this side, these are things going in the other direction. And we'll see this matters as well, right? So not all one way. So lonely is being used less, and sad is being used less, and trouble and loneliness. Those words are just being used less, and that, in terms of this score, this primitive score, kind of help after the 1980s. All right, so that's a simple thing to do. For whatever reason, people don't do this much. They measure sentiment scores in all sorts of ways. They don't show you which words are moving things up and down, and you can easily see whether you've got something that's wrong or right? So, for instance, in Moby Dick, which I'll show you in a little bit, cry and cried and crying appear a lot, and also coffin, right? And coffin's a traditional Nantucket name. There's still coffins there, so that's not being used in the way you might simply think. So you can switch them off. You can just turn them off. Okay, this is just a little more about this. This is our sanity check thing. So this is ordering the top musical artists. So it's not a bad list, right? And there's some constraint on whether they're in there. So you should recognize some of them from. And then the bottom is also pretty clear. People will recognize Metallica, but yeah, just the titles, the names do the job for you. If you get into the lyrics, yep. But of course, people really enjoy this too. So humans are complicated. So this is a little bit of work we did. So part of the inspiration for this was a site called WeFeelFine.org, which is amazingly old now, I suppose, but 2006. Jonathan Harris, who's a sort of an artist-scientist character, and Sepp Kamvar, who's was at Google, now at the Media Lab, made this quite beautiful site at the time. They won lots of awards. But basically, they trawled through blogs and found where someone had said, I feel, or I am feeling something, and then they just pulled out the word, right? So we took those sentences and applied our algorithm to it. And they had all sorts of metadata, so people apparently had put their age for some of these blogs. And so this is middle school, and then this is middle age, 40 to 60 at least in terms of our measure. This is actually sort of opposite to what you would see from self-report, right? If you ask people how they're doing here, they're not, right? It's not always a positive response. They have children, they have jobs, and so on. But when you look at the things that people are producing, and again, this is just from bloggers from a particular year, different thing. So we can again look at the words, see what's going on. So this is why the 13, 14-year-olds are sounding less positive than the ones in their 40s and 50s. So there's more stupid and sad and depressed and bored and lonely and alone and mad and pain. So middle school, yeah. Middle school, which I have one in the middle of middle school. And yeah, it's not good. Okay. Poor kid. All right, so you can do things like compare male and female voices. And again, this is just for these blogs. About the same. So the numbers at the top, the average is about the same. They're basically the same, at least for these blogs. But if you look at the words, you can still do these word difference things. And I know these things are hard to look at. Once you kind of get them in your head, they're great. But these yellow ones are why are pushing the female voice up. The blue ones are sort of pushing them down. And so they're being used more by the female voice, right? So more heart and happy and love and so on, but also more hurt and hate and sad. So there's a wider variance, at least in these blogs. And the only one that the male voice goes to is good, which can encapsulate so much. I'm good, good, good. That's in the top 15. All right. Okay, so we said, all right, fine. Let's try and make this a better thing. Comics fans might know Scott McCloud's work. That's where these pictures come from, which connects into Inside Out, right? The sort of spectrum of emotions that are in the Pixar movie. It's very much the same idea here. We'll get to them at the end if I have time. So we presented, so we went to Mechanical Turk, which is sort of harder to use these days in some ways. And instead of moving out from this ANU thing, which had this weird list, right? This weird list of meaningful words, we simply went to 4 large text bases and sort of, extracted certain things. So it's 20 years of the New York Times, for example, 50 to 60 years of this. Google Books is about 200 years we looked at, and took the most commonly used words, right? So there's the and of. 20% of words in English are typically used just the first 6 words. We have the zip distribution story. And we got people to rate the, right? We did a very silly thing. We said, how does the make you feel? But we took 5,000 from each of these, and if you combine them, the union of them gives you just over 10,000. So it's a good set of words, 50 ratings per word. So we spent a little bit of money on this one. We'll expand out to 10 languages towards the end. Okay, so this is what pops out of this one. Lots of extra data there, but at the top it's laughter and happiness and love and all these things, right? So these are the ones that are, there's rainbows and, right? So these are positive words, okay? And this is the bottom, right? The bottom is bad, right? So terrorists was the bottom and all these things. Yes, I mean, this is the time we live in, I guess. But, it's all about death, right? So actually this is not life isn't kind of obviously in there, but life is sort of hatchings, matchings, and dispatchings, right? So at the negative end, we're kind of concerned about the dispatching part. All right. Okay, so we can do this too. We can look at the ones with the highest standard deviation. So these are the words that people don't agree on. Or have very strong opinions on, but there's a diversity of them. And it's quite an enjoyable list. I've tried to censor them a little bit. I think when I first put this up, I'd failed to put a few asterisks in. Anyway, so yes, so swear words, but also then vices. So there's cigarettes, beer, wines, zombies for some reason gets kind of a spread of responses. McDonald's, which is true, they've really tanked, but yeah, ways to run large groups of people. So capitalist is here. There's religion. Yeah. Churches is up here. Anyway, so that's an enjoy. If you go on a website, you can easily kind of get this list and sort of scroll through it. But I think you've got the idea. Okay, so these are words that we probably don't want to use to rate things, and we move them out. Yeah. Okay, so this is, all know about Twitter. Twitter's been around for a while, but it's kind of fun to just go back and look at, and there's lots of bots and all sorts of things now. But this is normalized over, it's taking many days and then 0 to 24 hours for a day, and then just finding how often We're just asking a question: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So, and so this will be advertisements and so on. But I had a lovely sandwich for lunch, and this is dinner. So it was just there's just a first little thing. You get a sense that people are really talking about what's going on now, and of course we know that with news and so on, events happen. Twitter erupts about it for good and bad. This is hungry, starving, food, eat, and chicken. So there's a lot of fun with this sort of thing. Pizza is different, and drinking is different. Pizza tends to go off like this. But yeah, so lunch, I'm going to talk about it again here. All right. So tweets have become more and more complicated things. So this is a tweet from a few years ago. It's from one of the government shutdowns. So we're probably about to have another one. So that's what's inside typically what's inside a tweet. I mean, they are nasty, messy things. Anyway, the retweets and also they've become quite biological. All right, so what else have we found? All sorts of things. All right, so this is what I call the daily unraveling of the human mind. This is just 2 cycles. And of course, it's different kinds of people are tweeting at different times of the day and so on. But this is early in the morning, and then it tends to kind of go down. Now, not shown here is the variance goes up as well, right? So emotionally, kind of it's falling apart, and you're expanding your statement. So this is through the whole week, and we'll see this again. Saturday is sort of the high point. This is unlabeled. These are 5 very different swear words that you're not allowed to say on television traditionally. They have remarkably the same kind of trajectory, and it nicely fits against this unraveling story. Okay, yeah, we lose the plot. All right. So we need to be rebooted like Windows machines every night. The reason for sleep, there it is. Okay. So lots of other things. So this is correlations in networks on Twitter. So we're looking at reciprocal reply networks. I'm just going to throw up a few of these things here. But pretty strong correlations. We're not looking at contagion there. That is a very hard thing to look at, and people have done things that I'm not sure about. So there seems to be a social structure to positivity. You can do this sort of thing. I don't know if you can read this. It's always hard to read, but take a word, any word you want. We took 100 words and phrases and looked at and found all the tweets that were in them, and then looked at the ambient score and see how these things correlate. So 0 means that the words around them are neutral relatively, and you'll see things like the emoticons, right? So here's a sad face with a nose, and then smiley faces. So the words around them. So this is to show you that even though we're looking at just really just words, they do correlate with the words around them. So there is some goodness there. They're not disconnected. What else is here? So Stephen Colbert was here, and then Jon Stewart was here, and I think this is back in the day. So this is Glenn Beck. Anyway, all right. So you can do that sort of thing. So you can look at ambient happiness, and you can get these instant kind of opinion polls of how people think about things, right? So Tiger Woods, if you look at that, it goes and then sort of starts to come back up around a particular Thanksgiving event. Okay, all right. I just want to throw in a few other works that have come out or that are coming out or have come out recently. So we've just looked at words, and it's the easy thing to do. We've done this forever. Everyone's done this sort of thing. You just chop word-based languages up by spaces. This is a piece of work, so there was the best of times, there's the worst of times. As you go through here, this is tuning a parameter where we pass language entirely at the phrase level down to letter level, and then look at zip distributions. And we have a result that shows that a kind of a random passing of language into phrases does a better job of producing these zip distributions. It's something that can then feed into giving you phrases. What are the phrases that matter, right? So of course we're taking things like New York City and breaking into New and York and City. Everyone does this all the time. That's ridiculous, right? I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to do. We do it over and over. So this is one way of using large amounts of text to then say, no, really, you should keep that as a block. Lots of other things. I mean, I just want to, if you're interested in this, there's Zipf's law actually has a break in it, and this is an explanation for it because you're mixing texts. That's for the language people. This is a piece of work that actually, given all of the language that exists now, phrases that exist now, actually looking on the Wiktionary, what's the adjacent possible set of phrases and words that haven't been defined? And it was successful in that we found them and then put them up, and then editors actually started to give them, enter some of them in. So it's a very interesting, how does language evolve story. All right, there's little bits on the side. And this, I just want to say, if you're into Google Books, this is a piece of work that's coming out in +1 to show that it's kind of a mess because it's library-like for a start. There's only one of each book, which is people have talked about a lot. But it turns out that it's just full of science. Actually, it's full of scientific literature. They just filled it full of journals, and it doesn't really work out so well. All right, that's some extra stuff. All right, so let's get back to our main thing. Just trying to advertise extra bits. Hedonemy.org. So this is what it first looked like. We put this up. We've got a whole bunch of things associated with it now. And I'm worried that I can't connect. Anyway, it's OK. Let me think about this. So this is the first version. The basic thing you'll see is, so these are these big spikes. It's at the day level. It's colored by day of the week. So the red and blue are Saturday and Sunday. Tuesday turns out to be the low day, at least on Twitter, roughly. Because Monday, you still got some stuff, good things that happened. And Tuesday, it's a long way to the weekend. So these positive events are all these planned ones, right? So they are, this is Christmas and Christmas Eve and Mother's Day is in here and all these sorts of things. And you can say, well, people aren't really happy on those sorts of days. But generally, they are expressing positive things. And you will see, for instance, Saturday is a positive day, but people are also saying, so they're talking about wedding and party and sports and all these sorts of things. Those words are being used a lot. There's also bored and hangover and some other stuff going the other way, right? So you can really get at the detail there. So the positive stuff, it's these kind of annual events. We sort of know what to say collectively. The negative things are tragedies, right? So this is the death of Michael Jackson. I think I have, right, so here's what you have now is a much more interactive thing. You can kind of zoom in and out. There's the H1N1 influenza, that's a complicated one. Earthquake in Sumatra. This is the Boston Marathon bombing, the not guilty verdict. So many more of them have been, these sort of kind of local violence type things have happened in the last few years. Yes, it's true that, if Justin Bieber gets arrested, they'll talk about that too. But or someone in One Direction has a birthday, there's a big spike. Humans. But these are unplanned tragedies that we react to. So Robin Williams was a tragedy, and that led into Ferguson. So you see this kind of real downbeat there. Anyway, so this is a fun thing to play around. There's lots of things you can do with it. This is just zooming in a little bit. So Boston Marathon, this is Friday. That's the arrest. Corey Monteith from Glee, his death is here. Right, so lots of celebrity deaths get involved. This one ended up as being negative, so it's Brazil just getting thumped by Germany 7-1. Just the way people were talking about it gave it a negative thing. So you can go in and see what was going on the day. There was some emotional thing happened on that day. And so Bin Laden's death is the kind of an odd one for people because it is very negative, but it's a negative thing having to a negative character. So the texture of that day is pretty complex, so hard to measure it in one word, and that's why we sort of expand out to these word shifts. What else did I want to say about that? That's probably enough. Yeah, so these word shifts, you can share them, you can play around with them, right? There's all sorts of things in here. They are a bit complicated to look at. This is the Malaysia, this is across the Ukraine, the flight that was shot down. So you start to see the words as crashed and missile and so on. There's less love and less happy, and those things are pushing things the other way. This one is Robin Williams, right? So it's terrible. There's lots of things about depression, and RIP is here. There's some positive things here about peace and comedy and laughter, but generally it's bad. And that's Ferguson. Let's see, so yeah, there's some swearing. Tear is actually tear gas, but it still picks up as negative. Violence, so on. We have what we call a word shifterator, so you can take a text and pile it into here, and then a comparison text, and it'll make one of these comparison things. It's just incredibly important. If you want to say this thing is happier than this thing, you have to be then able to explain why that is. Okay, so let's go on to some other pieces. All right, that's all online. Geography. So this is a little blog post just for fun. We looked at Manhattan, and it's the Hayden Planetarium was sort of the most positive one. But then we went, I'll just go through that. We moved on to something a little more substantive, where we took tweets. These are geotagged tweets, about 1% of all of Twitter, and then looked. I don't know why we chose blue and red. This is terrible. But looked at the states. There are lots of things. It has a little Twitter account and so on. This was comparative, right? So it's cities and states. So people got excited about this, and I'll give you a little. If I can get this video to work, I'll show you. But then we correlated this. So this is the 50 states plus DC. We correlated our score based on Twitter with things like gun violence. It's a health score there, a peace index, Gallup well-being, where they're actually asking people, and then this kind of funny other composite score, which isn't that great. And generally speaking, again, you have to sort of sit down and look at this, but generally speaking, this real-time, ridiculous thing using Twitter does well. Ordering cities, so Napa, Idaho Falls, right? These are all kind of positive. We'll come back to Napa in a second. Beaumont, Texas was down the bottom. We got a bit of press for that. Flint, Michigan is here, right? So this is a tough thing. Okay, so let me show you some. There was a lot of video press for this. Tiny thing. Al Roker was on the Today Show.
Did you know about this?
There you go.
Hashtag happy.
Okay, that's done. That's enough. So it got sort of shortened into something very silly.
Welcome back to the Rhode Show. This morning in the buzz, do you think Rhode Island's happy? Look at the smile we have on our face. Not compared to Hawaii. Hawaii was found out to be the #1 happiest state in the country. I know we're shocked by that, right? We're shocked by that.
You're right near the water.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. Pineapple everywhere.
That's according to a new research done by the University of Vermont, who sifted through a bunch of Twitter accounts and Twitter itself to get all this research. And when we say they did research, they have charts, they have graphs.
Pages.
It was very, very technical as far as how deep they went and to see how happy people were across the country.
Definitely technical for Twitter, for that matter. And you know what? The happiest place on earth, Florida wasn't even number one. Quickly, too, Louisiana. Taking that last spot, Mississippi, the second to last as well. Louisiana kind of see maybe over time.
I think it's probably a lot of tough times that they've had, some of those other places.
Yeah.
All right. One more, and then we'll move on.
You know, apparently Twitter just did a study to find the happiest city in the country. Did you hear about this? They looked at over 10 million tweets and recorded which areas used the happiest words. And then they determined that the happiest city is Napa, California. Have you been there? It's beautiful. Beautiful. I would like to live there someday. It's beautiful. It's wine country, and it's always 72 degrees, plenty of land. So I sent my reporter Amy there to ask people what makes them so happy.
Hi, Ellen. I'm reporting from beautiful Napa Valley.
You certainly don't dispute.
You're reporting from where?
Napa Valley.
All right. How much have you had to drink?
No, I haven't seen Lincoln, but listen.
Oh, no.
This goes on.
Amy! Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Are you mad at me?
No.
I only have 1 glass of red wine and 2 bottles of white wine.
All right. No, Amy, I am not mad at you.
Yeah, you're mad.
No, I'm not. No, oh no.
I'm fine.
Okay. So yeah, people got excited about this. I mean, by that point, it's just Twitter did a study. And so, right. Okay. So this, one of our comments on our blog post was an agreement about the Beaumont, Texas thing, where you can read it. This was a little harsh. There was one that came, there was a few of these, and there was one that appeared a bit later that said, well, it's 1 hour from the coast. It has some lovely, and it was sort of someone trying to fight back. We're not enjoying that, but there you go. These are just reactions we got. And this, and I think that's the entire article actually. Yeah, I think that's it there. Yeah, yes, that's what some eggheads will say it again. Have determined. Yeah, Twitter, right? Okay. All right. So we've done lots of other things. Happiness and the patterns of life, right? So this is looking at, this actually confirms or agrees with work by the Barabasi Lab, Mara Gonzalez, on people moving around. So these are tweets based on geotag tweets, where you are at different points of the day, and this is sort of home and work, and everyone's pattern's been renormalized. So there's a sense of a universal movement pattern for people still out there. We grow fonder as we wander. So this is distance from home. This is the people who travel further seem to have slightly happier tweets. Lots of these things. So that's another paper. So I've mentioned these maps. Of course, we have an online version, which I can't really show you interactively. It pops up with these things. There's Massachusetts rated at 32. Vermont, yes, very smug. Quite happy with myself. And these kinds of rankings and those things, you can play around with these things online. All right, so we also have some other visualizations. One is one for movies, one for literature. Okay, so Moby Dick. It depends if you're a whale or not, right? So this is a couple of things. So this is smoothing in different ways. So you can kind of see that there is this, rough end to the whole thing. This is where we got rid of cry and cried and coffin. Right, so there's missing and shot and poor. This is the last 10% versus the first 10%. Die and evil and lonely and blind. The whale wins, basically. Lots of other things. This might be hard to see. This is, so now we're moving to different languages. This is Russian. This is Crime and Punishment. It ends here. And this is the Count of Monte Cristo in French, right? So he wins. Yeah, he wins. Right. Okay, so you can really sort of get into those things. And it's fun to play around with. Again, that's a Kurt Vonnegut thing. The online version for it, you can play around with it. There's all sorts of interactive stuff. This is Frankenstein, so we show that Frankenstein ends badly. Well done us. There's 10,000 books to play around with. The Harry Potter books are up there, and yeah. It's a spoiler, but when Dumbledore gets it, that's the lowest point. They always sort of end badly. Yeah. Anyway, you can look at these things. All right, it is in fact here. I did put it up. Right, that's all 7 books. Right, and that's this is when Sirius appears and he thinks he's got this father figure. Right, the end of the 3rd book. Okay, Harry Potter fans. Movies, we did movies as well, and this is kind of a fun thing to play around with. As you move around here, the script goes up and down, and we've set up so you can annotate it. Right, so this is Pulp Fiction. This is the GIMP. So yes, fond memories of that scene. Okay, and yeah. So at least, and so movie scripts are interesting things because of course there's what people say, and you can't always get the most recent one, right? So Alien, for example, we dug that up, and Ripley is a male figure, in fact, right? So because it's got to be revised, but they're all the descriptions of the scenes and so on. So there's a lot of text in there to get at. Okay, panometrics, so we're trying to make this, we have panometer.org, and we're trying to measure lots of other things, so let me throw these things in for you. I'm kind of worried about time, so this is, let's get to this one. Okay, so these are correlations between words and obesity rates. So these are words, these are words that negatively correlate. These are people who don't eat food, right? Brunch and that sort of thing, they're just talking about it. And these words do seem to correlate with obesity rates. There are other things like Budweiser, 0 correlation. It's just everywhere. But we have pretty good data on this. Okay, let me tell you about this one quickly, lexicocalorimeter. This is the dashboard that you see. It's got this kind of layout. You can run your mouse around on this. Okay, so we did something totally crazy here. We said, let's take, now we're working with phrases. Let's take phrases about food and phrases about activity, right? So here's chocolate, candy, snowboarding, watching TV or movie. And then one of them is calories in, one of them is calories out. And then we kind of have a caloric balance, and then we have an ordering of all of the states, and this correlates with obesity rates pretty well, right? So this does very well in diabetes. And there are lots of other things that correlate with that anyway. Colorado's at number 1. A lot of this is activity, right? So this is Vermont. Yeah, so skiing and running and snowboarding and hiking, less dancing and so on, right? And then things like less watching TV or movie. So eating is an activity, right? So you'll see that appear as an activity. And you'll see watching TV while lying down is also an activity. And that's kind of what happens down further down here. All right. Anyway, that's a real-time instrument. Again, sort of a health concern thing. You can look at which words are moving you away from the average most strongly. If you just take the top food word and the top activity word, it's pizza and watching television everywhere. Everywhere's the same. Yeah. So if you look at the differential on top of that, because we've kind of established that's what we do, so here you have grits, right? There's lobster for Maine. California sort of has a smug tomato thing there, which sounds good. But then there's chocolate candy and donuts for Texas and chocolate candy here in Louisiana. They're the words that are pushing them in their direction, right? If they're more or further, in sort of a good or bad sense. Running here for activity. The activity for Texas is eating. eating, right? And then this is pretty great. New Jersey, getting my nails done. It's really outstanding. And that's just the top, there's the top one. Okay, so, and so skiing in, where are we, Utah and Vermont. So, these things make sense. Mountain biking in Maine. So a little brutal, but there you go. All right. And then so this is Colorado, Mississippi, right? What are the things that are going on? So Colorado does talk more about bacon, but they've got these other things like olive oil and so on. More noodles seems to help them. Less chocolate candy, so they're talking less about the sweet things relative to everyone else. And then there's running and skiing and biking and so on. And if we go to Mississippi, there's more laying down as an activity, less running, dancing, eating, less ice skating, no surprise. And more talking on the phone, more sitting, more getting my hair done, more attending church. So it's a somewhat crude instrument. I mean, we do this in a funny way. If someone mentions hamburger, we just say 100 grams of hamburger. Okay. But serving size is difficult to deal with, right? There just isn't a good set of data out there for that, but we could get to it. So you can look into these things and play around with them. These are really nice things to play around with. If you click on this, it just shows you that, which positive words are sort of pushing up and the others disappear. It's fun to watch. Okay, the insomniometer I was going to mention. So these are sleepy tweets, right? So sleep insufficiency is more of an issue down here. So it's a CDC thing. These are these, okay. So that's the north. Yeah, right. So this is binge drinking. This is binge drinking, right? Drinking is a different texture, but this is binge drinking, right? So before we get too excited about ourselves up in Vermont, we have to look at some of the maps. All right. Okay. How am I doing? 5 minutes. Let me say this. Okay. So I've talked about stories. There are words here. We talk about how we should behave. We have everything from sort of Jainism, where you don't touch anything, to objectivism, where you don't touch anything a different way, it's just you. So we have these stories for how to live our lives, and of course we're communicating these things with language all the time. So it's kind of funny when someone says, I made, I built everything myself, like I made it all by myself, they've made millions of dollars. Of course, they're using this socially constructed instrument to communicate that piece of information. And money, of course, is, traditionally held in our heads. Anyway, fine. This is, so let's go back to these words. We have 10,000 words in English, and then look at their distribution of scores, right? And so, just very naively. So you see here's the neutral one, and there's a clear kind of bump out to the side. But we've mushed all of these things together. We put Twitter and Google Books together, and you can't really do that. It's the wrong thing to do, right? So we have to break them apart. This is Twitter, Google Books, New York Times, and Music Lyrics. Just they're separate, so there's 5,000 words in each. The yellow to this side means more positive, above neutral, I should say. And you see there's this positivity bias in each of them, right? So this is a paper that appeared in PNAS at the start of the year. Lots of authors about this. You can find this kind of frequency independence thing. Let me try to explain this very quickly. So this is the rank of the word, zip distribution type thing. The most commonly used word is the, right, down to the 5,000th word. See all these little speckles in the background? We've just taken a little slider through here and computed the deciles and then joined them up. And so you see that this overall distribution of a positivity bias is kind of true for rarely used words and commonly used words. So it's not as if, it's a frequency of usage thing. It's independent of it, which is sort of a nice thing for physicists. You can do this sort of stuff. So here are the commonly used words at the top, right? There's their rank, so death and funeral, obviously from obituaries. They're negative, and then mother and love, all these sorts of things. Over here, laugh is less commonly used. I can't even talk about that. There's no way I can talk about that. Okay, so we went on. This takes a little while to load. Okay, so we expanded this, and this is this NAS paper. I don't know if you can see this very well, but we have 24 corpora around the world for 10 languages, so 4 in the US. We have 3 Spanish ones rated in Mexico. Arabic was rated by people in Egypt, with Indonesia, South Korea, China, 3 in Russian. And they're very different things, like subtitles for movies, or tweets, or Google Books, like all sorts of corpora. We have German and French and so on. All right, so we make these little histograms for all of these different corpora, and this is what we get. So again, Spanish is rated by people in Mexico, Portuguese is rated by people in Brazil. You see there's this positive bias in all of them, and that was sort of the big story. Now there is a little bit of ordering to it that people, got excited about, I suppose. But South Americans are happier or something, or at least they have a larger variance as well. But you see Russian is moved around, it's here and here and so on. So it's not a simple ordering, which we probably wouldn't expect. This is variance, right? So these ones are more closed in, and it's the books, right? They're more closed in. And so there are 2 things here. These are the words that are commonly used in a particular corpus, and then how they're rated, by people now, of course. You can look at these. I call these things jellyfish plots. I actually got that in journals, right? It says jellyfish plot. So this is an official kind of plot. It's a jellyfish plot. So the distribution's at the top with these little tendrils again indicating the deciles. So this is German. It's German Google Books. So this word is rated negatively. Arabic, if anyone can read Arabic, you can pass this one. Lots of fun with these things. They're just fun to look at. So this is Portuguese Twitter. Portuguese. How are our Brazilians? We're Brazilians. So I had to look this one up. So it's ha 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 ha, right? It's yeah. It's easy to type too. So you actually get a distribution for ha ha ha's, because there are ha's and ha ha's and ha ha ha's, and they go all the way out to 140 characters, and then there are all the little errors. So it's very, it's sort of a fun undergraduate project. But this one, it's easy to type, and they get to be very long. Different distribution. So most languages, though, do have, like in Spanish, it's JA, JA, JA. This is Korean. This is a ha-ha out here. They managed to concoct a sad one, which is and these are, it's like, as I understand, it's anime, right? Crying, right? Tears, like this, when the character ridiculously cries. Okay. So little pies, you can stick them together. So they have an anti-particle for ha, 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 ha. This is to show you, there's not much time, but this is to show you that if you do a naive translation between all of these different languages, you get a pretty good correlation, right? So, death is a bad word in most languages, yeah. So, but there are meaning problems. What's the principal meaning you see of a word? And some words have unbelievably large numbers of meanings. Very quickly, nearly finished, I'll show you that we've done a little bit of work with other emotions, and if you've seen Inside Out, you'll know about this, or if you know more about psychological study of emotion, there are 6 emotions: anger, disgust, fear, sadness, happiness, and surprise. Surprise got left out of the film. I guess they couldn't pay him enough. Okay, so we've got these ratings here for anger and disgust, and so you can see the top and the bottom, right? So no one's disgusted by a piano, apparently. No one's angry at daughters-in-law, which is nice. And again, I think, so Beans and Johnson, no one's surprised by those things. And then these are things that surprise people. So you can create these sorts of things, and we can get there. We need to run some more studies here. But I'm very hopeful about getting that done soon. We need more money, essentially, for this particular thing. So you can create one of these kind of visualizations. And so this is the word earthquake, right? So very little happiness, and then it sort of maxes out the other parts. These are proposed units of measurement, right? And then again, this Scott McCloud thing, which is a very serious thing to me, actually, making comics. I mean, these emotions are encoded in our faces, and they can be dialed up or down and then combined in a matrixology kind of way, right? So, so there's the sadness, happiness spectrum, which we've explored, and then these other parts. But it seems so far, just a few examples, right? So lottery, happiness and surprise, tortured and war, both kind of max out these negative ones. They seem to be very correlated generally, at least in text, it seems to be hard to distinguish terribly much between these. Rutting, does get you more of the disgust thing. So I think it might be, when we're communicating through text, we are passing through a very tight little straw of information tube. All our facial expressions are gone and so on. Sarcasm's problematic, etc. All right, so there's lots of other things to do as we go on. Panama is building up. We've started a company that's named after a cute little Australian animal, quokka, the quokka. Okay, and there's lots of other things to work on. But you know, we're trying to get to this eventually, frames and stories. What are the extracting those things in real time? Okay, so that's a good place to stop, partly because of the time, largely because of the time. But thank you very much. There's lots more. There's all sorts of things online. I'm happy to share these slides with you and papers and talk.